I'm standing by the window in our Charleston, South Carolina living room, watching the late afternoon sun slide across the old shutters. James and I bought this house 40 years ago. He joked at the time, "Margaret, we're not just building a nest, we're building a fortress." We were in our 30s then. I worked in a school library, and he was a tax consultant. We weren't wealthy, but we were stubborn. And, as life has shown, stubbornness often takes you further than money ever could. The house was in terrible shape. The roof leaked, the floorboards creaked, and a family of raccoons had taken up residence in the basement. James called them our second tenants, but we weren't afraid. We scraped the walls, repainted the windows, even replaced the shingles ourselves, all while listening to jazz on an old cassette player. Year by year, this house filled up first with books, then with toys, and later with more books, the kind about gardening, philosophy, and cooking. Michael was born in 1986. Aaron in 1989. They grew up within these walls, and I remember every step of it. Michael hiding in the kitchen pantry with a jar of peanut butter. Aaron sobbing by the stairs when she lost her first doll. I remember the scent of their sheets in summer, washed with raspberry detergent, and how my heart clenched every time they got sick. This wasn't just a house, it was an archive of our lives. But kids grow up. Michael moved to Austin and got into real estate. Aaron moved to Seattle and became a manager at a big tech company. They called rarely, visited even less. Each visit felt like a business trip quick. No overnight stays, with gift bags that still had price tags. At first, I was hurt. Then I got used to it. People live the way they know how. Then came James's illness. He was diagnosed in 2021 lymphoma. He passed slowly, with dignity, never complaining. He was the kind of man who turned even pain into structure. I took care of him until the very end. We talked about everything. About life. About how he wanted me to go on. He made one request. "Maggie, don't let them take the house. It's yours. And only yours." I laughed through tears. "What, you think Michael and Aaron are going to kick me out?" He didn't answer. And later I realized he wasn't joking. The funeral was quiet. He wanted it simple. No black suits, no $300 flowers, he'd said. So we honored that. A small ceremony at the funeral home on King Street. A few close neighbors, some friends from his church. Aaron wore beige. Michael wore a light gray suit. I was the only one who cried. Afterward, we came back to the house. I'd baked lemon pie, James's favorite. There was a crystal decanter of bourbon on the kitchen table, saved for special occasions. This was one of them. We sat quietly, raised a toast. People shared memories. It was peaceful. Until it wasn't. We were in the living room, Michael, Aaron, and a few relatives. Michael poured himself another bourbon and said casually, "Well, now everything of yours passes to us, Mom. The house, the land, the accounts. Aaron and I have talked about how we'll handle it all." I turned to look at him. He didn't sound angry, just matter-of-fact like an accountant discussing office inventory. Aaron nodded, like it was already settled. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, as if I were going along with their plan. And then I heard the front door open. A familiar voice followed, dry, confident, with a slight, smoky rasp. "Sorry I'm late. Hope I'm just in time." It was Mr. Craigson, family attorney, tall, polite, dressed in a navy blue blazer. He carried a leather folder embossed with, "The Law Office of C. Craigson, Esquire." He walked into the living room, placed the folder on the table, glanced over at Michael and Aaron, and said, "I think we all need to have a little talk, especially about Mr. Ellis's will." I sat in my armchair, holding a cup of cold tea. I knew this moment would come. And I knew it was just the beginning. "Now, Mom, everything you have comes to us. The house, the accounts, the land, Aaron and I already discussed it." Michael says this with such ease, as if he's talking about placing an Amazon order. His voice is confident, almost condescending. He's sitting in the very chair where James used to read his newspapers every morning, swirling a glass of bourbon in his hand. His shoes rest on the rug I hand-stitched while Aaron was sick in 3rd grade. He doesn't even look at me. Everything's already been decided, itemized. Aaron nods silently. She's wearing the pearl earrings James gave her for her college graduation. She tucks a strand of hair behind her ear like she's in a boardroom and adds, without even softening her tone, "We thought we could turn the house into a vacation rental." Or maybe lease it out. Tourists love Charleston. And the land developers would be very interested. It's a prime location. I look at her and feel a cold wave rise inside me. Not anger, no. Something older, something that feels like pride and resolve. But I say nothing. I just nod, outwardly calm, as if everything is truly going according to their plan. And that's when he appears. I think I'll take it from here. The voice comes from behind, at the front door. Confident, almost lazily ironic. It's Mr. Craigson, our family attorney, a man James trusted more than most of his friends. He walks in slowly, like he's not here for an inheritance dispute but for Sunday lunch. In his hand a leather folder, in his eyes a steely gaze. He nods at me respectfully. Margaret. I nod back. Michael, Aaron. Michael tightens his grip on the glass. Aaron blinks, like she's trying to remember who this even is. And who are you? She asks. Craigson doesn't even turn his head. Christopher Craigson, your father's attorney, managed his affairs for the last 18 years. He places the folder gently on the table, right next to the bourbon, and begins. Today, in accordance with James Ellis's last will and testament, I am here to disclose certain provisions related to the estate. A silence falls. Only the antique clock in the corner ticks away. 5:30 p.m. Tick-tock, tick-tock. According to Clause 1, all assets, including the property on Elmwood Avenue, bank accounts with Chase, and the investment portfolio with Fidelity, are temporarily frozen until full legal verification is completed. What? Michael sits up straight. That's ridiculous. We're family. We're his children. Correct, Craigson replies, unblinking. But the will also states, no portion of my estate shall be transferred to individuals who have demonstrated greed, disrespect toward my spouse, or who sought to exploit her during her time of grief. I hear Erin's teeth click as she clenches her jaw. She tries to speak, but all that comes out is, "This is some kind of mistake." "Oh, I wish it were a mistake," Craigson replies calmly. "But your father was meticulous. There are printed records of conversations, audio files, even video footage from the kitchen security camera. Everything is time-stamped." "You have no right." Michael stands up. "This is a family matter." "No," Craigson says, raising his eyes. "This is a legal matter." I'm still silent. My hands rest on my lap, calm, as if all this is a rehearsal. But inside me, everything vibrates. James knew, he anticipated this, and he prepared. The will also states, Craigson continues, "If my children speak of inheritance on the day of my funeral, the matter shall be transferred to the executor of my will. That executor is my wife, Margaret Ellis. Her decisions are final and binding." Now I raise my eyes. The room is completely silent. Michael looks at me as if seeing me for the first time, not just as mom, but as a person. Aaron breathes heavily but says nothing. I place my teacup gently onto its saucer and, for the first time that evening, I speak aloud. "Thank you, Mr. Craigson. Please, go on." When Mr. Craigson began to speak about the will, my mind drifted back to those evenings on the porch, James sitting beside me, already frail, wrapped in a blanket, gazing out at the lights of old Charleston. "You need to be protected, Meg," he used to say. "I see how they behave. I don't blame them. But they've changed. Money has replaced gratitude. Success has replaced respect. I don't want you left alone with them, not in this house, not without support." We talked about it more than once, over a cup of tea, over the rustle of pill bottles. As the end drew closer, James didn't get sentimental. He got sharp, precise. Like the Marine sergeant he once was in Korea. He knew his children, and honestly, so did I. I just wanted to believe they'd change. That time would soften them. That kindness, or at least understanding, would eventually emerge. But James had no such illusions. He saw it all. How Michael only called on holidays, and even then, only to quickly check where the land deed was. How Aaron sent photos of the grandkids with notes like, "We'd love to visit, but we've got Aspen booked." And how, in the end, neither of them came to the hospital when he was intubated. "They'll say they loved me," he said once. "But you know what? Love isn't words, it's presence, and they're getting very good at being absent." I remember squeezing his hand that day. He felt so fragile, skin like paper, but his eyes were still clear, still that same blue from the day we got married. "If I go first," he continued, "I don't want you to be afraid. We'll do this right. I've spoken to Craigson. All the papers are with him. He knows exactly what to do." And he truly had thought of everything. There was even a special clause, Section 7B, outlining disrespectful behavior toward the widow within 72 hours of the deceased's passing, including coercion, manipulation, or any attempt to preemptively claim assets. You're not alone, Meg. I made sure you'd have the power to choose, not just a plea, a right. Those words echoed now, as Michael, wearing that smug little grin, tried to lecture me about what now belonged to whom. They forgot. Forgot everything. Forgot how I spent 40 years building this home alongside James, how I scrubbed the floors when he was out of work, how I cared for his mother as dementia stole her piece by piece, how I gave up vacations, dresses, new shoes so we could afford the mortgage. They forgot that a house is not just real estate, it's life, it's history, it's labor. Or maybe they didn't forget. Maybe they never knew. Maybe they never wanted to know. But James knew, and he left me more than just a house. He left me a right, a voice, the final say. I looked up at Mr. Craigson. He gave me the smallest of nods, a silent signal that everything was going according to plan. And all I thought to myself was, good, let them try and say it's theirs now. Mr. Craigson carefully pulled a set of documents from his worn leather folder. Everything was unfolding so calmly, as if we were deciding who'd water the plants, not the fate of nearly $2 million in assets. He adjusted his glasses, spread the will out across the dining table, still smelling of apple pie and fake concern, and began. According to the last will and testament of James Ellis, all assets, including the residence on Bellevue Lane, the 2.4-acre land parcel, and the investment account, totaling $1.4 million, are to be transferred into the full and unconditional control of Mrs. Margaret Ellis. Silence fell with the weight of a dropped hammer. The word unconditional echoed inside Michael's head. I could tell by the way his eye twitched for just a moment. Erin pressed her lips together. She always had that look, a mix of confusion and offended entitlement. She glanced at me like I had stolen something from her. "Wait, what?" Michael stood up, his voice cracking. This can't be the final version. This isn't fair." "Unfair." Interesting word coming from someone who flew in for his father's funeral with a suitcase and a folder of realtor contacts. Mr. Craigson didn't even blink. "These were your father's explicit instructions. He dictated the terms himself. I was present, and I can confirm his intentions were clear, deliberate, and legally sound. He had his reasons, and neither I nor you are in a position to question them." The room didn't empty because someone left. It emptied because something left. Their certainty. Michael clenched his fist. He wanted to argue, to press, but he couldn't. He knew this man Craigson wouldn't have let a single word fall out of place. "Dad wouldn't do this," Erin whispered. Not to me, but to some image of James she kept in her mind, the version of him that was soft, distant, convenient. The kind you can love from afar, effortlessly. I sat silently, sipping water from an old etched glass. It had once belonged to James's grandmother. I remembered washing it after our first wedding anniversary. And now, it stood there beside me at the exact moment our children realized their version of reality was just a mirage. And you know what? I didn't feel vindictive. I felt clear. This is what justice sounds like. Not yelling, not chaos. Just a few pages of paper and one dry sentence. He had his reasons. And me? I had James, the man who understood, who protected. I gave Mr. Craigson a small nod, and he closed the folder. As if the end of a chapter wasn't marked with a period, the spate and of H-Tachens, Tate and Vidas.alder.com, but with the firm stamp of a notary. I stepped into the kitchen under the pretense of putting the kettle on. The house was full of food and drinks, but I needed to get away to breathe. The walls in the living room had suddenly grown tight, not because of the number of people, but because all the warmth had drained from them. I leaned against the old wooden kitchen table, the same one where James and I used to sit in the evenings, balancing our checkbook and deciding how much we could give to the Veterans Fund. He always wrote everything by hand, neat and precise like an engineer, and I would double-check with a calculator and a pen, sometimes with a glass of wine in hand. We were a team. I remembered the night in 2009 when Michael called at 2 a.m., drowning in debt, a maxed-out credit card, some wild story about investing in a startup in Austin. James drove out the next morning without a single complaint. He just said, "He's our son." And then he was quiet for the entire ride back. I remembered how Aaron used to bring the grandkids for Thanksgiving, only to leave a day early. "It's too boring, Mom, you don't mind, right?" And I'd clean up after them half-finished drinks, half-said sentences, and half-remembered moments of love. And I remembered the last 8 months lifting James out of bed, coaxing him to sip broth, holding his hand when he couldn't breathe, reading him the newspaper, even when he could barely follow the words anymore. The kids? Michael texted 3 times. Aaron called every other week. "How's he doing?" No pause. No. "And how are you?" And now they were sitting there, in the very same living room where James had proposed to me 42 years ago, saying things like, "Well, it's all ours now." Number. Not anger. Grief. Grief that my own children had forgotten what it meant to belong to a family. That a house isn't square footage. It's where you stay when everything else falls apart. That an inheritance isn't something you take. It's something you honor. I wiped my eyes with the corner of a napkin, looked out the window where the wind was tugging at the curtains just like it had the day we first moved in. And I knew, everything I did, everything we did, it wasn't in vain. Just not for them, or not for them yet. I took a deep breath. The kitchen smelled like lemon and wood. And somehow, in that silence, I could feel his hand in mine. James was still here. He had done everything right. I'd just wait until the water boiled. When I came back from the kitchen, the tea was already cold, but it didn't matter. Michael and Aaron sat across from each other in armchairs, and honestly, they looked like children caught doing something wrong. Only now they were both nearing 40, and instead of school uniforms, they wore designer clothes and watches that cost half my pension. Mr. Craigson was still in the living room, quietly reviewing documents and making notes in a yellow notepad, just like James used to. Michael was the first to break the silence. He walked up to me with that tight smile I'd recognized since he was 5, the same one he wore when he broke a window, and tried to convince me not to tell his father. "Mom," he started, putting just a little too much weight on the word as if he'd just remembered who I was. You don't want us to be left with nothing, do you?" Aaron stood up and joined him, arms folded like she was at a job interview. "It's family property," she added quietly. "Dad wouldn't want us to be cut out." Oh, so now Dad was part of their argument. The same Dad they barely spoke to in the last year. I nodded. "Have a seat. I'll bring the tea." They sat down obedient, hopeful, as if tea meant reconciliation. What they didn't know was that I was about to say out loud what I had kept inside for far too long. I poured the tea into the cups calmly, without trembling, and set them on the table. "Do you know what family means?" I asked, looking at them. "Well, it's us," Michael said quickly. "No," I replied gently. "Family isn't just biology. It's also choices. It's showing up when things are hard. It's caring, remembering, taking responsibility. You call this place home? Did either of you ever ask how I was doing here alone? Did you offer to help without expecting something in return?" They stayed silent. Then Mr. Craigson, without even looking up, said, "Please repeat the last sentence for the record." I didn't flinch. I said, "Family isn't just by blood, it's by action." He wrote it down. A click of the pen. Michael took a sip of tea and tried again. "Mom, you have to understand we were just worried. We didn't know the whole story." I looked at him with a faint, almost maternal smile. "You didn't know because you didn't ask." The silence in the room thickened, like dust that had settled everywhere. No one played sympathetic anymore. The masks had fallen. Mr. Craigson carefully closed his folder. "I believe that's all for today. We'll continue the paperwork on Monday." Michael mumbled something. Aaron avoided my gaze, and I simply took another sip of tea. It was bitter like the truth, and warm like everything I had held inside for years. The next morning, the house was quieter than usual. No clicking of Aaron's heels down the hallway. No lingering scent of Michael's aftershave in the bathroom, his way of marking territory. No forced conversations, no tension in the air. Just silence. I walked downstairs to the kitchen and saw a note. Just 2 words. Call later. No signature. I didn't call. I'd heard the car pulling out of the driveway, no doors slamming, no words of goodbye. They left the same way they'd been living near me for years, focused only on themselves. I poured myself a cup of coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and for the first time in a long while, I simply allowed myself to breathe, not out loud but inwardly. Beyond the garden, past the flower beds where James and I used to plant roses, stood the maple tree. The same one he planted after our 20th anniversary. Back then, he said, "If we've grown this house, we can grow a tree too. It'll outlive us." I walked down to it. Its leaves rustled gently in the Atlantic breeze. And suddenly, it became clear this house was no longer about expectations, no longer about memory. It was about choice. My choice. That same day, I called a young woman. Well, a girl, really, Layla, the daughter of our neighbors across the park. She was only 22, but last year, when James couldn't get out of bed anymore, she came by to help me with the garden quietly, carefully, respectfully. She showed up an hour later in jeans, gloves on her hands, and a smile that wasn't pretending. "What would you like to do first, Mrs. Ellis?" she asked, holding a small trowel. I looked at the maple tree. Clear out everything that's choking the real growth. She didn't ask for clarification, she just nodded. And that day, for the first time in ages, the house was filled with different voices. No demands, no veiled discontent. Voices that didn't call me mom but respected me as a person, not as a resource. We worked until noon, replanted the peonies, cleared out the old pots, cleaned the shed where James once kept his tools. There was a quiet ritual in it, not a goodbye, but a continuation. And that evening, sitting on the porch, I suddenly realized, for the first time in months, I truly felt at home. Not in a house full of claims, but in a home where life actually lived. I spent a long time thinking whether I should. Whether it was worth using words on those who had already said everything once through silence. But then I decided, this isn't for them, it's for me. I began the letter simply, "Dear Michael and Aaron, this house was once truly yours, not by right but by feeling. You grew up here. You scraped the floors with your skateboards, hid behind curtains, argued at the kitchen table. Your laughter echoed in these walls. And I cleaned, patched, cooked, and held together the life we all shared. I don't regret any of it, never. But you know what I've realized in the days since your father passed? A house is not square footage, and it's not a market value of $3.2 million. A house is effort. It's time. It's respect. It's the labor of 2 people who chose for 40 years to stay together even when it was hard. And it is not a storage unit for your expectations. James planned everything, not because he wanted to punish you, but because he saw who stayed when things went dark. I read that paragraph again, and again. Then I added, I'm not closing the door, not on you, not on the future. But only if you're willing to open something too. Not your wallets, your hearts. Inside this envelope is a check for $100. It's not charity, and it's not sarcasm. It's a sign, a symbol. That value begins with something small. And if one day you wish to talk, really talk, not about deeds or property lines, I'll be here, in the garden, by the maple tree. With love, Mom. I placed the check inside. Signed the card. The paper had blue hydrangeas on it. James always loved them. I sent the letter by regular mail. No tracking. No expectations. A week passed. No reply. But I wasn't expecting dramatic repentance. I'm not the director of their coming of age. I'm just a person who once gave them life and is now giving herself a new one. Layla came again that weekend. We planted more roses. And that evening, I sat once more on the porch. Silence is not loneliness. Sometimes, it's the respect you've finally given to yourself. A month passed, and things got quieter. But in that quiet, something new emerged. Not emptiness. Space. I started small. One Friday, I baked an apple pie, not because anyone was coming over, but because I wanted the smell of cinnamon and butter in the house. Then I called Beth from next door, the one with 3 noisy kids and a library in her living room. Beth, I've got pie and tea. Want to stop by? She came. Then her friend from book club joined the week after. And one Thursday I said, what if we make this a regular thing? Thursdays we read and talk like we used to, not over screens. And that's how our little club started. No flyers. No newsletters. Just a few women from 20 to 70. Reading Jane Austen and James Baldwin. Talking about life. And no one watching the clock. Then came the dinners. I opened up the old terrace, set out candles, brought out the china I'd been saving for someday, and realized, if not now, when? Neighbors came. A widowed veterinarian, the girl from the art gallery, a music teacher from the local college. People looking for warmth not in heated blankets, but in conversation. One day, a young man, Jason, maybe 20, was helping in the garden. He looked at the old swing under the maple tree and said, Miss Ellis, there's something just right about this place. Not cozy. Right. I didn't ask what he meant. I just smiled. Because I understood. I'm living again. Not because I'm alone now or have money to spend, but because I'm finally doing what matters to me. I'm not proving anything to anyone. I'm not seeking approval. I'm not out for revenge. This isn't a triumph over someone. It's a return to myself. The younger ones here respect me. Not because of the name Ellis, but because I know how to listen. How to stay silent when it matters. How not to dramatize and not to give up. The house is breathing again. Not like a museum. Like a heart. There was a time I feared that when James left, everything would disappear. That I'd dissolve in the silence. But the opposite happened. I didn't disappear. I appeared. And you know what? That's enough for me. It's been a year since James passed. A year filled with silence, with new voices, and with a slow, quiet reckoning. Today is the anniversary of his death. I'm standing by the fireplace in our Charleston home. The shelves still hold the photographs' echoes of the past. Today, I brought fresh flowers, white lilies, his favorite. They smell soft, but steady. Like memory. On the table, I placed a picture of him. Next to it, a candle, gently flickering. And a small note. A letter to him. Or maybe, to myself. You always said I was stronger than I believed. You were right. Now I know my words matter. And I've used them. I smile. Not with bitterness. Not with regret. But with the quiet pride of a woman who has walked through fire and stepped back into the light head held high. Now I understand. A house isn't just walls and land. It's a story, one I'm still writing. It holds the memory of James, yes, but also the truth of who I've become. I've grown stronger. Because I chose myself. Because I stood up. Because when they said, "It's all ours now," I didn't break. I answered with my final word. Calm. Clear. Without looking back. I'm here. I'm alive. And now, my voice is the loudest of all.